We are being told by proponents of high-potency marijuana that its legalization will lead to a reduction in crime and keep young people out of the criminal justice system. Here with a perspective on that from 30 years in law enforcement is Nicolas Roti. Don't do that at home. During Mr. Roti's career with the Chicago Police Department, he rose to the rank of commander in the gang intelligence and narcotics sections. He is currently the executive director of the Chicago High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area. Director Roti.
So, we have the fun task of talking about marijuana today. I really don't purport or describe myself as a marijuana quote-unquote expert. I'm more of a, I would actually say though, I probably do have the credentials to consider myself an expert on crime, cartels, gangs, and I will kind of try to fashion my statements to kind of mix what we know from other states with what we have going on in Illinois and in Chicagoland currently, and how that might end up looking in the long run if marijuana does become legal. So as was mentioned, I have a pretty long career in law enforcement. I've been in law enforcement since the mid-'80s. I was with CPD. I retired as the chief of the Bureau of Organized Crime. I was the chief there for, deputy chief and chief for almost 10 years. So I had all of the specialized units and all the federal task forces under my command. So I was able to garner a pretty different knowledge of crime in Chicagoland and actually nationally. I serve on the Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs Committee for the IACP. I'm a member of the Illinois Department. I'm in the Illinois Drug Enforcement Officers Association. So I get a different perspective, and I try to get a different perspective from a lot of places. HIDTA, just to give you a brief overview of what HIDTA is. HIDTA stands for High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area. HIDTA is a national program under the Office of National Drug Control Policy, which is a presidential office. HIDTA's main focus is to disrupt and dismantle drug trafficking organizations. We are a program, we're not an agency. HIDTA brings together state, local, and federal law enforcement to all work together to go after drug cartels primarily. That said, with the recent opioid crisis, we also have more of a 360-degree approach, so we do a lot with treatment and prevention as well. So, Chicago. Chicago has a long-standing crime issues, shall we say, organized crime. We all know that. The organized crime in Chicago right now, in Chicagoland, I should say, because it's not really, it centers in Chicago, but it's not just, it's not only in Chicago, it's spread out through the whole state in a lot of ways, is we have cartel presence, very strong cartel presence in Chicagoland, and we have organized criminal street gangs. The way it works is basically the way drugs are trafficked is the Mexican cartels are the #1 supplier of drugs to the Chicagoland area. They bring in drugs, and organized criminal street gangs distribute the drugs at the street level. And this goes for all drugs, including marijuana. We have presence from several cartels. You've heard a lot in the news about Chapo Guzman and the Sinaloa cartel. Actually, Chapo was indicted in Chicago. That was a case that literally started on the street level on the west side of Chicago, and started out with the low-level drug trafficking and worked its way all the way up over the years, all the way back to Chapo Guzman, and we, in the Chicago case, actually has him on tape on a wire over here, talking from some secret mountain location in Mexico. And it's a very strong case here, but they decided to prosecute the New York case. I say that to say that marijuana is still a big profit center for drug cartels. It's a big profit center for our gangs. There's a lot of talk that by legalizing marijuana, and they try to correlate that to maybe alcohol in the 30s, right, and prohibition, and that once alcohol became legal, it kind of hampered organized crime then, the outfit from bootlegging and other bootleggers. But the problem is we're not really seeing that in other places in the country. So what might seem like it's common sense doesn't always mean that that's going to happen. We have the benefit, unfortunately it doesn't seem to be being used, but we have the benefit of looking at other states that have taken this journey, for lack of a better term, this tact of what they purport to be income revenue building for the state in other states. And we can look back. I mean, there's a pretty good track record in Colorado. I mean, we're going back to 2012 when they started, and so the problem is we're not seeing there what everyone says we're going to see here, and I think that is problematic, at least because we're not also trying to take the steps, it doesn't appear, that we need to take to ensure what happened there does not happen there. No one seems to be looking, what's the old saying about repeating the past? You don't watch it, but I don't know, maybe Illinois knows how to do it better than everyone else. From our track record, I'm not so sure. A couple little points. This is such a multifaceted problem, and there's so many issues around. I mean, you could literally get, and we have marijuana experts that work with HIDE. We have the National Marijuana Initiative, and we have a speakers bureau. As a matter of fact, the doctor who the clip was just shown is one of the speakers at sometimes the National Marijuana Initiative through HIDE funds to go out and speak to places. So we have a lot of marijuana experts. Like I said, it's such a multifaceted issue. I do not consider myself an expert, but it might surprise some of these little tidbits I'll throw out during this talk is that right now, Illinois is the state that receives the most high-grade marijuana from Colorado of any other state in the country right now. We have the highest percentage coming to Illinois. So how does it get here? I would say planes, trains, and automobiles like the rest, but mostly it's automobiles and the mail. It's getting shipped here through the mail, through regular U.S. mail and through private carriers. Yes, we have interdiction teams that try to stop it, but it's so much, it's not all getting stopped. And it comes through everything from, a lot of drugs, a lot of marijuana coming through in bigger conveyances on the highways, but also kind of like individual entrepreneurs, filling up a trunk of a car and heading this way and trying to make a profit when they get here. We talk about crime, and we talk about how, it was mentioned earlier about how they say it's going to stop crime. Well, it hasn't stopped crime anywhere. In fact, depending on what you want to describe as crime, everything from violent crime to traffic accidents, most of the place, Colorado is the place most people focus on because it has the longest standing track record, but everything has gone up there in Colorado. Pardon me? Exactly. Well, we're talking about crime, so yes. There's been more traffic fatalities, and there's more hospitalizations. What does hospitalizations mean? Well, a little bit was alluded to in that video clip about potency. We were talking back there, and we said, this isn't your mother and father's marijuana nowadays. This is a whole different drug. In fact, in the Netherlands, when you have a marijuana, everyone talks about, well, these other places have legalized this for years. A lot of them are actually starting to turn back on their legalization of drugs because of the deep issues it has caused in their society. But in the Netherlands, for instance, and in most of Europe, they at least set a limit on what the THC level can be in their cannabis. Over 15% THC level is considered a hard drug in the Netherlands specifically, and in other places in Europe. When you talk about like the Cheech and Chong days and marijuana and this and that, well, I smoked marijuana in college, you hear people say, it didn't hurt me, right? Well, the THC level there kind of hovered around 3 and 4% at the most, right? Now, routinely, but through genetic engineering, through different types of methods of growing, in fertilizers and the whole gamut, we're seeing routinely 20 and 30% THC levels in marijuana. coming from all over the country. Even here, it's here too, but not in the numbers it will be in the future. When you talk about, she mentioned dab. If, I don't know if people, I'm sure the law enforcement people know, but dabbing and all that. You see now, at the same time that we're talking about legalizing marijuana, what do we see all over now, Illinois? All these vape shops, right? Everyone's vaping. That's the cool thing to do. You drive down the street, you pull next to a car, it looks like, again, a Cheech and Chong movie, a car full of smoke, right? They're smoking these little vaporizers, right? Well, guess what? The stuff that you can put in there, the dabbing and the shatter and the marijuana resin, that stuff usually has about 90% THC level. So imagine now what that's going to cause, and let alone traffic. Now they say, well, marijuana hasn't been proven to cause an impairment like alcohol has to driving, right? But unfortunately, when you look at Colorado, and I'll try to get you the exact number, I don't remember, but it's like about 18% higher traffic accident rate since marijuana was legalized there, and like a 28% higher fatality rate. 29%, I was close, fatality, and 18% more accidents. So a lot of problems we have in that respect from law enforcement is that there is no universally accepted mechanism to test for impairment of marijuana like there is for alcohol, like a breathalyzer. Not only is there no universally accepted test device, we can't even agree on what's the universally accepted level of THC in your system. So it's a double-edged problem there that you would like to see us, or when I say us, Illinois or other people, kind of try to solve before we move forward with legalization. Because based on the track record of other places, accidents will go up. Some other more concerning issues along that line is in Colorado, which is one of the more concerning issues. There's been a huge increase and this is reported from the Rocky Mountain Poison Center. There's been a huge increase in marijuana exposures to children. And I'm not talking about teenagers that are smoking, I'm talking children. Either they're getting into edibles that are left around the house, which is again another offshoot of this legalization, as well as it's also usually has a pretty high THC content. So for instance, just to throw some numbers at you, from 2012, the hospitalizations for marijuana exposure doubled from 6,700 to almost 12,000. So, and for all healthcare related exposures from all ages, there's been a 139% increase of hospitalizations for marijuana exposure in Colorado. So we talked about, or it was mentioned earlier, about teen use. So the good news is, or maybe I should say was that actually teen use of marijuana has been steadily going down in this country for the last decade or more. It's been going down. But what we're seeing is in Colorado, Oregon, Washington State, where it's legalized, it is not going down, and it's actually staying level and starting to go up. So, like anything else, when you tell people it's legal, there's less of a hindrance. It starts, I was talking to the chief of Barrington back there, and he was mentioning about some experiences where people are saying, hey, well, even parents, well, it's no big deal. Their kids are getting caught with marijuana. It's no big deal. Because why? Super slick marketing campaigns, right? We talk about, this is big business, right? So it's interesting as we see tobacco being villainized, we see the rise of marijuana. And we also see, and tobacco rightfully so, right? I mean, I'm not saying tobacco's good, but we're seeing marijuana follow the same kind of blueprint that big tobacco followed years ago. Some of you might know this or remember, but it's funny when you look and see some of these old marijuana ads, tobacco ads. What do you see in some of these old tobacco ads? They're out there. You could probably even Google some of them, but unless they've been kind of like suppressed. But there's ones that say, 9 out of 10 doctors recommend Parliament for asthma. I mean, that's what they're out there, doctors recommend Kent for nervous conditions. Well, what did marijuana do? It's the medical marijuana. We all knew it. Everyone here in law enforcement knew it. As soon as they started going medical marijuana, we knew that was the foot in the door. The goal was always legalization. We knew it from day one. We told people from day one. We had some people say, oh, no, don't worry about it, but it was happening, and it did, and look where we're at. It didn't take long. It actually happened faster than I thought it would. But you talk about, we're talking about the medical thing. So THC and the THC levels really does nothing medically at all, okay? It's cannabidiol that supposedly, CBD, that supposedly helps in certain medical conditions. So this race to rise the THC level, which is what gets you quote unquote high, and gives you the buzz or whatever they're chasing, there's no reason really, if you're doing it for medical purposes, to raise it, to keep trying to get that as high as you can. That's strictly for thrills or recreation purposes, or however you want to say it. So so we talk about, so what should we do? Well, I see my friend Judy Kramer out there from Educating Voices, and Judy is staunch, like most people in this room. We got to try to stop this, right? Stop it. I mean, I agree, but I'm not sure right now. It looks like that steamroller's rolling. I don't know. I hate to throw a wet towel on things, but, I tend to be a little skeptic. I don't know if we're going to be able to stop it. But one thing we need to do is try to have a voice at the table and at least steer it a little bit. And there's certain things that we have to make sure that are accounted for in whatever law might get passed. And right now, they're completely being ignored from what I could tell. For instance, home grows. Well, we gotta let people that can't afford to buy it in these stores be able to grow it at home. Well, guess what? Everywhere that they've allowed this, it's just been a backdoor avenue for criminal activity. Home grows it's been exploited in western states, Colorado, California, that by not just mom and pop type operations, which it has, but by organized crime, cartels. I mean, we have them here already. So it's going to be interesting to see if that changes anything. Some places didn't have them as much as we did, like Colorado. Well, what happened? As soon as they did this, they moved in there like it was going out of style. You had even organized crime coming. You'd think it'd come up from Mexico, which was kind of already had a platform. But you have organized crime from Cuba, from Eastern South American countries in there, let alone some others like Russia, Chinese are involved. Everyone wants a piece of the pie. So how do they get through the home grows is one of the easiest things. Not to mention a bunch of public land grows as well. Illinois is a beautiful state. There's some beautiful parts of it. Maybe not as beautiful as a lot of parts of mountains in Colorado, but Colorado is getting wrecked by these outdoor grows. I mean, they're going into these national forests, and same with Colorado. I mean, California. I drove around in California with the group, and we looked at some of these places, and there's acres and acres and acres of, they're not plants like this. They're plants that are 6 foot tall and more all over the place. And they use they basically are almost like locusts. They'll go in there. They have people sitting there, armed people. I mean, they're there with shotguns in case anyone stumbles across their property, or not their property, public property, but their marijuana grow. And not to mention, they have no regard for what they're putting in the soil. I mean, they're using all kinds of crazy different chemicals and stuff to try to make it grow faster, and that's actually flowing into the water streams in these places. And I don't want to get too far off track, because frankly, you get going, and there's just so many different facets of problems that need to be watched out for. But home grows allow a foothold for organized crime and people to circumvent the law. If you're going to regulate it, and you're saying, well, we're going to regulate it, we're going to do it better than everywhere else, there's really no excuse for having home grows. Figure out another way that the quote-unquote people who can't afford it and need it for medical purposes can get it, because we seem to be able to get medical care if you really need it other ways. You don't have to allow people to grow it at home, because what's going to happen is it's going to get out of hand, and that's going to affect property values. We see, just like meth labs in houses, we see houses ruined from home grows of marijuana. Not to mention, imagine you got a home, a nice house, you know, your dream house, maybe your retirement house, and next door someone rents their house out or bought with cash from an organized crime group, and they turn it into a grow. You got traffic going in and out. You smell marijuana all day. And I don't know if you know, but even when you're not smoking it, it smells. You know, the plants smell. So it changes. It's gonna affect. It has the potential to affect property values as well if they're allowing home grows popping up all over the place. That's another big issue. So I'm running out of time here, but I think that some things we have to focus on. At the same time, keep focusing on stopping it, but also we got to get a voice. We have to be able to talk about and demand that certain things be taken into consideration. For instance, that the regulatory framework that they have in place, which the Illinois State Police, I spent about a year with the Illinois State Police when this was going on, and they worked very hard to get a framework to govern medical marijuana and to make sure that it was being done as correctly as possible. I hate that term, medical marijuana, by the way. I mean, medical, what does that mean? It's marijuana. But there's a regulatory framework in place. Right now, it's kind of being discarded for this whole recreation thing. It's not mentioned, so that has to really stay in place. We should try our best to prohibit home grows, because again, I'm not going to repeat it, but that's a big problem. And we have to retain oversight goes hand in hand with that regulatory issue I said, by the Illinois State Police. Probably they're a statewide agency. They're a little short-staffed, but they're the ones to do it, and they have to remain. They have to retain some type of oversight along with the Illinois Department of Agriculture, because right now it's kind of like the gates are wide open the way it's written. And here's another thing: any quote-unquote legal product should be required to have a label on it, or some type of label that says what the potency is, because we see a lot of that in Colorado. People are going there on vacations, and they're going on, you know, marijuana vacations, for lack of a better term, because they're going to the legal state, and a lot of those are the people that are getting hospitalized. They think they're smoking what they remember as marijuana when they were in college or something, and now they're smoking something or taking an edible that is 50, 60, 70% THC content, and they're, for lack of a better term, overdosing. You can overdose on marijuana. I mean, it's not the same type of overdose as heroin, but it is technically like an overdose. And they're hospitalized for it. So labeling is a big issue, and traffic is going to be the next issue. We have to strive to come up with what we're going to consider acceptable level of cannabis in your bloodstream to be able to drive. So, well, those are pretty much my comments on that. I think you're on the right track with what you're trying to do, but it's definitely still a fight that we're going, so that we have to go forward with.
Yeah. So let's be clear. Will legalization keep young people out of the criminal justice system?
Well, again, my opinion, I don't think it will. I think a lot of people say that because there's a lot of this talk about people being arrested, and I could speak mostly for Chicago and Chicagoland in general, but mostly Chicago. And marijuana users are not targeted for arrest. And you hear a lot of this I don't want to call it rhetoric, it's a little strong, but a lot of this opinion that this will change all that, because it'll be legal, so you won't have all the kids going to jail for having a couple joints on them for marijuana in Chicagoland. The people that go to jail and you see are people that are selling marijuana. I didn't really get into it, but we see a lot of the old, we saw, especially in the last like 10 years, a lot of the old gang leaders in upper gang echelon that went to prison for gang activity and mostly for drug charges in like the late 80s and early 90s that are getting out of jail now, they're not going back to selling heroin as much. A lot of them are going back to sell marijuana. And why? Because the profit margin's almost as big and there's almost no recourse criminally on it. They're getting slaps on the wrist even when they're caught. So it's still, in Colorado, the black market has thrived underneath this layer of legal marijuana. So I have no reason to expect it to be any different here.
One more question. Now, in Colorado, high-potency marijuana has been legalized for 6 years, but they still don't have an effective roadside test for, being high.
Yeah, I kind of mentioned it briefly before. I mean, even in Canada, where the whole country is kind of legalized recreational marijuana, nowhere has a test right now like that works like a breathalyzer that we could actually say on a roadside or anywhere else what the THC level is. And again, we can't even agree on what the acceptable level is. So it's kind of a twofold problem. I mean, and the other problem is even when you're post-accident, in Illinois, if you're involved in a fatal traffic accident, you don't have a choice. They're going to take blood from you, if you don't agree to do it. But people talk about, well, there's going to be less people drinking alcohol if they're smoking marijuana. But again, that has also not been proven because usually we've seen they go hand in hand. And a lot of problem in these states that are trying to keep track of this is that a lot of them, when they test for alcohol and it's above the legal limit, they don't bother going then to test for marijuana as well. They got what they need. He's over the legal limit at marijuana, so it's they charge him with involuntary or alcohol-related traffic death, and then that's it. They don't bother going for another intoxicating substance. Sure.
They tell us there's a lot of oversight here in Illinois with the medical marijuana. They're talking about this black market in Colorado. Is there something like that going on in Illinois with the medical part of it? I mean, is that stuff getting out into people's hands anyway?
That's a great question. And the medical marijuana in Illinois, from what I can tell, is not really blossomed like they wanted to, right? I mean, the numbers kind of stayed a little lower. People that went and got medical marijuana cards. I will say this, that we seem to be getting more Colorado marijuana that we're seizing than we're getting internal Illinois marijuana that was originally supposed to be medical. But almost everyone, and I'm not going to say because I don't know for sure in Illinois, but everywhere else, they produce more marijuana than they can legally sell. So, I mean, I don't know what they're doing with it. If they're destroying it, I don't think so. I don't know but in Colorado, that's why it's coming here. It's from all over. They can't sell it legally there if they're producing too much of it. So I don't know for sure. I don't know of a lot of cases that it's happened so far. I mean, it's watched pretty closely here. That's why I said we got to strive to make sure some of those regulatory laws and stuff that we have stay in place for recreational if it gets there.
Thank you. Thank you.